Welcome to IB Unplugged, a Cognity podcast for IBDP educators that tackles your submitted challenges and questions by connecting you with experts and peers who share their ideas and stories from real classrooms. Whether you're a seasoned educator or new to the IB world, each biweekly episode and guest aims to equip you with practical tips and positive inspiration, helping you teach with more confidence, creativity, and joy. So whether you're walking your dog or commuting to school, hit play and join a community of educators ready to learn, laugh, and thrive in your IB journey. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of IB Unplugged. This week, we're talking to Matt Kuykendall about the Deep Learning course. Now, this is a course that's not specifically in an IB school, an IB program, but it has elements of theory of knowledge, has elements of psychology that are built into it, and basically is focused quite a bit on building competencies in young people and putting that center stage instead of letting a curriculum drive the whole course, and then along the side, we're developing sort of soft skills. This course is kind of flipping that, and it's saying, let's make sure that front and center we're building these competencies, and we'll use elements of TOK or things that we might know from the psychology course to kind of build that, but basically we're focusing quite a bit on the competencies themselves. Super interesting course, lots of really valuable things here that you can put into any sort of teaching that you're doing right now. And Matt has been an excellent person to talk to about this. Courtney, you've worked with Matt for a little while, right?
Yeah, exactly. I've been working with him as long as I've been working at Cognity. So this has been since 2017. He's been a very active participant in Cognity's growth. He's been working on IBTOK. He's been working on IB psychology, making the actual textbooks. He was one of the lead authors. He's done many webinars. I'm sure some of you have sat in on some of his webinars that he's done in the past, working with all kinds of resources. So yeah, I've had the absolute pleasure of working with him for many years now. And these past couple years at the American School in Japan, he's been able to create this seminar and this course. And it's really so interesting to learn kind of how he's taken his background as a TOK and psych teacher and really created this fantastic seminar that I think, like you said, it's not something that's directly part of the IB, but so much resonates with it. It resonates with the ATLs. It resonates with TOK. And there are so many pieces that I think he was really great at sharing what you could do differently in those subject courses that he's learned from doing this deep learning seminar.
Mm-hmm. And naturally, when you put the soft skills front and center, the question has to come around assessment. How are you going to assess that? How is it going to be valued both from the students, the parents, and beyond that in terms of universities and that sort of thing? It was really interesting hearing him talk quite a bit about the way they assess, the value and the impact that comes from the students as they do Harkness style seminars, as they kind of evaluate each other and do this sort of peer assessment. Those elements that he's talking about there, I don't think are specific to the deep learning course. There's stuff that any educator can bring into their own practice as well, and really have a profound impact on their students' learning.
Yeah. And I mean, just the topics that come up are just so relevant. I love every time he would give an example of one of the topics or things that the students are presenting on. I'm like, oh, I want to talk about this. Like, these are really great ways of students thinking critically and having these reflections on things that they actually care about and put energy into. So I think he's done just such a fantastic job preparing for this course and really setting up a great structure and the kind of content and base questions for the students to dive into. So I think, everyone listening will find these to be a great new way of looking at these competency-based learnings and see what they could use for themselves.
We've got a great episode for you. Stay tuned for IB Unplugged, where we've got Matt Kuykendall talking about deep learning.
Hi, Matt. Welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about education with you all.
Me too. So we like to kick off with a bit of a background question for you. And it is, why education? Why have you picked a career in education?
Oh, that's a great question. As long as I can remember, I wanted to be a teacher. Like, probably as soon as I knew that like you had to have a job to like make money and survive, I thought, well, teacher, what could be better than learning, getting paid to learn, and working with young people? Like, even as like a high schooler, I was working with the YMCA and doing volunteer work and coaching basketball, and I always just loved working with younger kids. And it's always been my passion. And in school, I was always attracted to English and history class because of the ideas. And even though I had more sort of probably traditional style teachers, they'd be called now, they were still able to sort of present the study of humanness through both history and literature in a way that just grabbed me and just I became infatuated with.
Nice. You mentioned having teachers who are kind of more traditional, and I guess our second follow-up question is more along the lines of how do you see that role of the educator evolving, both I guess from what you've experienced, but now looking forward into the next few years, how is that role of education going to change?
Yeah, I think education has a few roles, right? Like in our societies and cultures, it's always played a few roles. One, it's been to certainly educate students in the traditional sense, teach them to read, write, do onboard skills that allow them to be a productive member of like the economy, to be honest. And I'll talk more about that in a second because I think that's what has changed a bit. And then it's also been to socialize and to teach the values of the culture. That's always been a huge part of education, is to teach kids, that book, everything I learned everything I know I learned in kindergarten, right? Like to share, to be kind, to be generous, to teach values and to onboard sort of the mindsets of the culture and the mindsets that are going to create thriving communities as these kids like grow up and mature and go out into the world. I think both those things maybe are changing slightly in terms of the emphasis and the outcomes. I think in the more traditional approach to education, outcomes have definitely been on the content side. And while they were doing that cultural education, that value education, it was often sort of done maybe at the lower levels, like in kindergarten, elementary school. And then when you got into middle school and high school, that wasn't considered as serious. That was sort of just pushed to the side. And now we were doing like the real work of like content acquisition.
Yeah.
And now I think we're starting to understand through different researchers in psychology, Amanda Duckworth, and her work on grit, and Seligman and his work in positive psychology, and lots of work from a lot of different other researchers, letting us know how important that sort of emotional intelligence is, mindset work is, and with the changing needs of the modern economy, from people that can do calculations themselves, can crunch numbers themselves, can even like computer program themselves, with AI emerging, it's a different sort of landscape. Mm-hmm. And so I think that schools need to do is we need to change into leaning more into teaching more of those sort of cultural values, those mindsets, those skills, and really lean into our humanness to sort of teach empathy, teach human connection, because that I think is what's going to be marketable and important is our humanness. What can we bring to the table that like AI can't,
Yeah. No, I think that sounds great. And I think that it seems like with your deep learning course, that is the trajectory that you're kind of moving towards also. And I would love for you to, share a little bit describe your deep learning seminar. Like, what is it? How's it structured? Let's start there and dive in.
So at the American School in Japan, we launched this course, Deep Learning Seminar, as you said, this year. It was co-created with myself and two other colleagues. And we thought to ourselves, we asked ourselves that question, like the question you asked me, John, is like, what is important, right? What should every kid who leaves the American School in Japan learning experience, what should they leave with? What skills, right? What skills are going to benefit them the most, both as individuals and as productive members of society? And the more sort of administration thought about it, and our school board was really sort of progressive with this, and our director Jim Harden in conceiving of this course, the more we thought about it, the more we realized that it is soft skills, it is mindset, it is like the ability to think about themselves as a global citizen, it is the ability to collaborate. It absolutely is critical thinking and creative thinking, and those are words that are not new to education, but I think they're new in the way we've sort of approached teaching them, which I'll get to later. And we thought, what how can we maximize that stuff? Because all these things that I just mentioned, teachers might be listening right now and they'll be like, yeah, I teach English, I teach IB psychology, I teach IB bio. We do that too. We collaborate, we critical think, we do all that stuff. And I would say the difference is that in our course, we made all that stuff front and center. It wasn't the appetizer, it wasn't dessert. It was the entree, appetizer, and dessert. And we thought, how can we design a course where every day they're in situations where they need to do at least one of all these different things, these competencies we call them, and reflect on it and develop metacognitive skills. And that was another sort of key component. We thought being able to know yourself, know your strengths, know your limitations, and how to leverage those in the service of self and others is what is also super important. And how do we teach that? So the course is structured around big essential questions we sort of call global problems. Some are like, what is truth? Right? And how do views of truth impact human behavior? One is, how do we balance divergent truths? So John's truth might be different than Courtney's, right? But they both believe in it wholeheartedly. They both might have evidence for it too. So what do? Do we just, whoever yells loudest, do they get their way?
That's normally how it works, yeah.
Yeah. Loudest person in the room, right? How do we teach students to sift through the noise, so to speak, and decide for themselves? Because that was sort of the third outcome is in our landscape right now with so much misinformation, again, to return to AI and its ability to sort of flood the zone, to use that unfortunate phrase, with stuff, we need to equip students to be able to sift through that and find the facts within the noise, right? And they need to be able to think for themselves. We want them to really realize how much is just sort of onboarded and they just sort of have taken on and not necessarily chosen for themselves. But we want to teach them that process of choosing. We want to walk them through that process of, okay, well, how do I go about even deciding or choosing how I feel or believe about this, really important issue. And that's done through just putting them in situations and asking them to reflect on it and think about it. We just had presentations today where students had to think of a truth in society, and then they sort of had to autopsy it, right? Like, where did this come from? An example is one of our presentations was, they asked the question, the truth was that it was questioning the truth around beauty standards, right? And they did this whole inquiry around the role of representation, specifically Disney, in creating truths around what is beautiful. And they traced the history of like Disney princesses and even sort of Pixar movies and how that's sort of changing. And they talked about the recent controversy around Snow White, the lead being given to a Latina actress, and the Little Mermaid controversy, and whether that was, a valid controversy. Should people be upset about that or not? And so we just asked students to sort of really take on issues and work through those issues in a way that's evidence-based and relevant to them. And then talk about it with each other.
So it sounds like the vehicle then for this curriculum, because like as you mentioned earlier, you may be a biology teacher or somebody else and you go, yeah, we teach critical thinking, we teach collaboration, we teach some of those particular skills as well. Just the vehicle or the entree, as you put it, is biology curriculum. It sounds like this now shifts a little bit to what the curriculum is, but as you were talking, I'm kind of hearing a lot of TOK. And I know you've taught TOK before. I wonder, can you distinguish those two for us? How is like the deep learning seminar either enhancing or a better version of what we might see in TOK, or are there overlaps, or how is it kind of set itself apart?
Yeah, there's definitely overlaps in the knowledge construction piece. Like, where do these beliefs come from? What are different methods of acquiring knowledge? What are the strengths and limitations of those methods? What's quality evidence? Big idea questions is sort of like that, even discussion of ethics. Where it's different is that I'd say TOK stays sort of philosophical, and we've tried to make deep learning more real-world relevant and daily relevant. And we've also emphasized the metacognition. So I sort of maybe buried the lead with my sort of discussion of the course. But I know we're going to talk about assessment later. But students and teachers both care about what's assessed, right? Like you can go, I'm a workshop leader for psychology, and you can talk about all this content, different approaches, and teachers want to know, like, okay, yeah, but what's on the test?
But what's the assessment, and why have my kids been marked down on the IAs? I want to know.
Right. And how do I construct learning experiences and lessons that lead to the exam? And teachers care about it because they want to honor their students. Teachers care about it, not that they're necessarily worried about getting evaluated by how many fives they get or what their IB average is, although I'm sure, unfortunately, some schools do use that metric to evaluate teachers. But most teachers are worried about it just because they care. They want to do right by their students, right?
Right.
So in every course, we end up caring about what is assessed. So we said that this is a problem. This is why it's different in TOK and IB biology. It's like in IB biology, you're not necessarily assessing collaboration. Right? You're not assessing global citizenship or mindset. You're not assessing that.
Sorry, I might have the space to teach that and to scaffold some learning around it, but you're right. That's not going to show up itself directly in the assessment. I mean, obviously there's a new change with the IA where you can collaborate on some data, but ultimately it is the individual and what they know and their skills, far less than the actual collaboration.
Right, totally. And like mindset and the ATLs are the best IB schools integrated as you do, John, in your classes. And that's awesome and wonderful. But when, push comes to shove, it often can get pushed to the side. And again, it's not what's assessed. The students aren't like grinding it. Like they're like, oh yeah, sure, reflect like here.
Yeah.
Whereas we literally assess metacognition. We don't assess the essay. We don't, the presentation I mentioned today on Disney and its role in representation, creating truths around standards of beauty. They gave that presentation. That I didn't assess it. We listened to it. We respected it. We asked follow-up questions. What's assessed is the student's own reflection on that work. What did you learn from that you didn't know previously? Why were you drawn to that? Were you engaged in the process? Mm-hmm. If so, why? Did you get to be in a flow state? What put you there? What was interesting about that? What could you have done differently? How did you consider your audience when you were designing those slides? You had us ask and answer those questions. Did you think that went well? How could you have made it more engaging? These are literally the questions that my students need to answer at the conclusion of creating an artifact, like a presentation or writing an essay. And that's what they're assessed on. Mm-hmm. And that's what I give them feedback on. And that's a key difference too, is how many teachers are taking the time to give feedback on ATLs or some of these other mindsets and skills. Whereas this course, that's all we do.
It lends itself a ton to the development of the learner profile, just as you mentioned, and kind of the things that are longer lasting, what we're hoping that students are going to develop as they leave. And we all know they'll forget aspects of our curriculum anyway, but what we hope stays are those sort of things that you've just mentioned. I'm wondering, how do you kind of get that emphasis for the students to help them think more on how important that reflection is? Like in our classes, we'll talk about reflection. We'll get our students to do some reflection, that sort of thing. We see it as a valuable thing. And yet at the same time, I think they get some reflection fatigue. How do you get that sort of shift from this is content, I need to have my content, to this is a truly important thing that I'm doing as part of the course?
I'm smiling and laughing as you're talking because it sounds like you were in our room as we were planning. It sounds like you're in a room now with kids saying, not another reflection. Are you serious? Like, we just did one. This is ridiculous. Yeah, you nailed it, man. Reflection fatigue is real. I remember when I was in teacher college, right, in my ed major, and I had a joke that they made us reflect on our reflections, and it like drove me crazy. Like it became this like throwaway thing. Yeah. And how do you maintain the authenticity and the sincerity? And we asked this question of us as a deep learning team, my colleagues and I. How do we stop the metacognitive reflections that we grade from devolving into an IB Psych essay, where it's might be formulaic, where they learn how to tick the boxes? Because we do have a rubric, because again, we're trying to we give them sentence starters about how to have begin a really metacognitive thought. Like
you have to have scaffolding.
Oh yeah, and I've caught kids using AI, in all honesty. I've put in AI checkers, and it's like they're using AI to do their metacognitive reflection.
Reflect on this as if you were a 16-year-old student doing this course, please.
And so a strategy we've used, to be honest, and again, this is year one of the course, and we're learning every day. We are reflecting, no joke. We're reflecting, obviously, like good practitioners, and we're like, okay, so is this working? Are we reflecting too much? We actually just made the decision that indeed we are. We also have these at the end of every unit. So at the end of our unit on truth, right? We have a Harkness, which is just a whole class conversation in an oval. It's a trademark sort of term from, I think, Phillips Exeter. And it's student led. We give them prompts, but they have a day of research sort of preparing for the Harkness where they're meant to sort of design their own questions and get different perspectives. We created choice boards of resources to sort of arm them with the resources to sort of look into different perspectives. And then they have to reflect over that. Then they do an artifact. I just mentioned the presentation on the truth audit. And then they have to reflect on that. And we're realizing like that might be too much because that's coming in quick succession. So how can we build in reflection into the process? So for this truth audit, we sort of change it up, and instead of having them sort of write a reflection in like a formal way, when they're finished with the presentation, I just ask them on the spot some of the questions that I posed to you, like what drew you to this? Why did you choose Disney, right? Why are you engaged in the process? So there's significance. They'll reflect on that maybe formally, but process, I just ask them in the moment, and they answer those in front of the class, which I thought was really powerful too. And so we're trying to think of more creative ways to sort of build reflection into the work itself, to make it also more authentic, we think, to your point, John. And we also have moved to, instead of just writing, we've gotten almost all students now, it's actually like 80%, they're interviewing each other. And that's been way more sincere. Yeah. So like the three of us could even get together and we'd ask each other questions and follow-up questions. Again, we have a list of questions that they can choose from to reflect on. Our standards are process, communication, and significance. And each of those has a collection of questions that they can choose to reflect on. And they interview each other. And those are awesome. Those are less formulaic and less AI generated than the essays, right?
Sure.
And so we're trying to encourage, we haven't required it yet because we want kids to be able to work in the medium that they're comfortable with. And sometimes it is quite personal, so they don't want to work with another student. But like I said, almost 80% now are choosing this interview method, which is either video or just like a voice note that then they airdrop to me and I can listen to it.
All right. Hi, my name is Robin Walensky, and I am a school leader at NIST International School in Bangkok. I'm recording live from the IB Global Conference in Singapore. I'm going to give a tip for Cognity right now as the Vice Principal for years 12 and 13 and also the Diploma Coordinator at NIST. I can't say enough about Cognity and the agency that it provides our students in their studying and exam revision. Our kids are very excited about the platform. They use it across the board in all subjects that Cognity offers. They absolutely love it, and they like to use it outside of class more than they do in, and the various question banks and practices are their very favorite. I highly recommend Cognity.
How have you found, like, I think that a lot of reasons for the assessments in traditional classrooms are also for providing that external motivation. And I'm wondering if you are finding that it's hard to get students on board to really commit to that level of reflection and that level of preparedness for these discussions, because like you said, you can't, if none of the kids are coming prepared with any background questions or knowledge, then it's going to maybe not be the same level of quality that you're hoping for in the conversation. Like, has it been hard getting students motivated in the same way when they have a different way of being graded or assessed or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes and no. They've had, like, one of the first feedback early on, because this is our, I mentioned earlier, this is our, inaugural cohort of these year 11s. It's year 11s that do it, by the way. That's important to mention. And some of them at the very beginning were like, we want the discussions to be graded. We want you to grade our artifacts. Like, why aren't you grading our presentation? Why aren't you grading our... They wanted it to be graded because they were like, but like, I'm putting all this effort into it. And we're like, yeah, the journey's the point, like and we're trying to really teach that because the journey is the point. Like, the grade doesn't matter. Like,
and they're like, yeah, that's cute. No, I want a grade.
Yeah, exactly. The answer is some kids still will use AI for the reflections. Some kids will spend that day of like preparation for the Harkness doing, probably other homework on their computer, in the corner or in the library, or maybe they're sitting outside. It's, like I said, it's beautiful spring cherry blossom season. We have beautiful trees in our courtyard. They'll go out there and do whatever they do. But I'm giving them that trust that they're going to use the time like, how they see fit to do it. And hopefully we make the questions relevant enough that they care, that it matters to them, that when they want to look into it because it's interesting to them. I mean, one of our first Harknesses was on identity. And one of our questions was, are your identities chosen or given? And what sort of that came from is we used the case study of Rachel Dolezal. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she's an individual who was born ethnically Caucasian to 2 Caucasian parents, but identifies as Black. And she worked for the NAACP in Washington State. There's also a community of individuals in Appalachia. The BBC did a news coverage of them, a little documentary, little documentary, and they are all phenotypically white and all identify as Black. To the point where that's what they write when they go to the doctors. That's what's on their driver's license. And we said, is this okay? Who gets to decide? Do you get to decide your identity? And of course, the correlations to transgender issues are obvious, right? So a transgender person identifies, is that different than transracialism? And some people are of course it's different, and get really upset about this. And then you ask, why? Why is it different? And then that opens up a whole longer, more nuanced conversation, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so we try to make it relevant and interesting. And just like you can't get every chem kid to love chemistry, or every bio kid or psych kid to love psychology, you hope you can, right? That's what you're trying to reach everyone. But we're trying to make it as interesting, as engaging as possible. And we're trying to empower them. Again, we're trying to teach skills of self-management. So if we notice students aren't coming prepared, they're not talking during the Harkness, they're mailing in the reflections, their work is not at the level that it should be, then we have a conversation. And to be honest, I haven't had to have many of those this year at all.
Good.
It's cool because what you're talking about here lends itself so much to what we, I think, really aim to do within education itself. And I know Court and I have spoken a few times regarding AI and its impact on education. And often we kind of come back to this idea of, are we asking great enough questions? Are we providing stimulating enough content that doesn't make somebody just want to go to AI and just jump the hurdle, seeing this as just a barrier to what I could do next, but instead actually something that's really quite enriching. And it sounds like what you're doing with the deep learning course is exactly that. You're providing that deep learning on topics and things that are interesting for students that kind of go beyond what they could find from an AI model or something like that to kind of avoid the work as it would be. And you were discussing earlier with the Harkness style discussions, and especially when the students are kind of having that reflection conversation together, my mind as an educator was just sitting there going, that sounds like the thing, right there, when they are reflecting really well, when they are talking to one another, interviewing each other, it sounds like that's the deep, powerful learning that's going on. And it almost, in my mind, doesn't matter what kind of gets assessed or what sort of shows up after that, because that's the meat of it. That's the whole big thing. One, is that accurate? And two, is that kind of the whole idea here, to try to build up that authenticity of young people to see where they can assess themselves and they can go without needing that guide on the side kind of thing?
Yeah, I think we really do view the Harknesses as if we've done a good job throughout that unit on truth, that those will be really fertile and really stimulating for all students. And it'll have a lot of buy-in. And, we have 4 period days, so we have 75-minute, 80-minute classes, and they generally go the whole time, right? And it's just them. They get in, we start right away. And they're talking about the whole time, just, 15, and we do cap all our deep learning classes at 15. That's also important to mention because we don't want it too big, right? Because that's a large enough discussion. And that sort of tells us that we've been able to get their interest. We've been able to prepare them with perspectives, diverse perspectives that allow them to represent diverse perspectives in that conversation, that they do it respectfully. We start very early. I'd mentioned earlier about we want to teach kids how to have civil discourse in our society. I see Stanford just brought back this course. I think it's called Civil Society, that they used to require until the late 90s, then they dropped it for a variety of reasons. And now they brought it back because they decided that students need to learn how to disagree with one another, that they don't know how, right? And again, this is related to Haidt's work on the coddling of the American mind and sort of his thoughts and ideas on this, that a lot of our students haven't ever been in a disagreement and they feel really aggrieved when someone disagrees with them. And so we're teaching them that it's okay to have to be maybe proven wrong or if someone disagree with you, right? That's okay. And we're really trying to empower that and teach them different language they can use. Like another perspective is, I would offer up a counterclaim to your point. Something like that, right? To really take it away from the person and make it about the ideas. And we teach them this language, we role play with them. And that part has been going incredibly well. What we actually are sort of having issues with our students is them sort of still worrying about being wrong, and so hesitating, and that's coming out in the reflections, which is really interesting. Like, oh, I would have said this, but I was worried that it would be misinterpreted or that I would be judged. And this fear of judgment is something that's really pervasive, that we're trying to create. We said from the beginning, this is not a safe space. This is a brave space. You might get your feelings hurt sometimes, and that's okay. Someone will disagree with you, hopefully, right? If we're doing it right, like there will be disagreement, because that means we're open and we're honest with one another, and we're voicing our perspectives, and we're listening to diverse perspectives.
You can't be surprised when they feel like they're going to be judged, when that's basically all we've done throughout their entire educational career.
Right.
Let me put some judgments. I'll even put some numbers and letters to show you how I've been judging you thus far.
Yeah.
You can see where that would be a paramount sort of thing that's important for them.
Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting because when you were talking about it being about the kind of discourse and the debate part, and it's like when I was in college, we were required to do public speaking, which I feel like was a really valuable thing to be able to practice and like a skill to develop. But like that's just one-sided. Nobody ever talked back at you. And that's really the important part.
The important part is someone talking back at you and you actually listening.
Right.
And hearing them, not just thinking of how to prove them wrong, but thinking of how to expand your own worldview. And this is sort of why we start by, and we don't want them all to be sort of like nihilists, but like we lean on like Harari's work in Sapiens, right? Everything is any large scale cooperation is based on myths, right? And it's all made up. Civil rights are made up, money's made up. That doesn't mean it doesn't matter. Race is made up, gender is made up. It doesn't mean it doesn't matter and doesn't have real world impact. It does. It absolutely does. But the point is that these things are socially constructed, and that we have power as societies and as groups of people and as cultures to sort of construct ideas that have things that are invented but have real meaning in the world. So these things are not like, come down from, they're not written in stone. They're not like, the laws of nature, like the laws of physics. And so they might be wrong. There might be ideas, beliefs that are very pervasive. I mean, think of all the things that used to be true that are patently not true around like superiority of races and other social truths that existed, right? That we know are absolutely not true. And that's what we get them to understand, is that just because something's true, known as a truth, doesn't mean that it's supported by fact. Mm-hmm. There's some truths that are supported by facts, and that's awesome. But there's some things that are considered true in society that are not supported by any fact at all. They're just widely held beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah. In these discussions, how much do you get involved? I'm not familiar with the kind of rules of the Harkness model, but I could imagine it's easy to get derailed, but maybe that's also the point.
Yeah, I've only, at the beginning of the year, I didn't ever get involved at all. Recently, I got involved in one because they got sort of off track down this far tangent. And we normally encourage tangents, but this is just so out there that I'm like, okay, can we get more on focus? Why don't you guys consider what Siobhan said about this, right? Mm-hmm. And then that brought them back. I've never had to get involved yet to prevent someone from ganging up on another individual or something like that, or some sort of like conflict. And generally they are pretty good being on point. It's really interesting to see kids that sort of emerge as leaders. And the best is the kids that just hate the awkward silences. And they're not generally leaders, but they cannot stand to just have an awkward silence to be like, so, does anyone, I guess we should start with this question. And it's just to see them sort of like emerge into that space through their discomfort is just great to see.
I mean, it lends itself to just the question of what does the teacher do? Because obviously many teachers might be used to like a teacher-led classroom. This sounds very much like a student-led classroom, especially in the Harkness style. What's your positioning? How do you kind of lead the course? How are you involved in it? How do you see your role in that space?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we were given the gift of time last year, my colleagues and I, to plan the course. So with our period day, a full teacher load is 5/5 at the high school level. And I had 2/5, and then 3/5 was planning this course. And my two colleagues who had the same schedule. So every other day we were planning all day. So we were able to plan literally every single day moving into this year. And every day starts with a provocation. Well, every day starts with an SEL opener.
SEL? What's that?
Oh, like social emotional opener. So it'd be like, John, if you were a fruit, what fruit would you be and why?
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Okay.
What fruit would you be, John?
The first one that came to mind was banana, but that's probably just because my daughter is all about bananas right now.
So I'd be a coconut because I get to chill on the beach all day.
Nice. All right. Hey, bananas on the beach as well.
So we just get the kids, and again, just like sharing, and high school kids are cliquey, and they're sort of in these classes. As international school, we have lots of new kids, and then we have a provocation. So maybe it's that documentary I show of all these redheaded white people that identify as black, right? And it's like, okay, so what did you think about that? But much more structured questions around that. So we do a lot of like think, pair, sharing. We do a lot of small group work, and a lot of sort of it's all discussion based. So it doesn't look unlike a TOK class. Some days we'll have like graphic organizers where they have to like work through something, like a structured inquiry around something. Like for example, coming up here, we're moving into this idea of like collective good. So like I mentioned earlier, how do you handle competing ideas of collective good? And what does the structure of a thriving community look like? Like, what does it mean to thrive, both individually and collectively, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're going to look at different constitutions from around the world to see different cultural and political perspectives on thriving. Because ideally, one would think that a constitution is set up to create a thriving community. We would hope, right? We'd hope.
That's the idea.
Yeah. So that's the more sort of example of something more like a structured inquiry where it's like there's this incredible resource, I forget the exact website, that literally just has every country's constitution on it. And so we're just going to be like, okay, go. And they have some questions they need to answer about commonalities, et cetera, and then share out. So every day is very much small group discussions at like 5-10 minutes at a time. We do a lot of like, we have like butcher block paper that they'll write on. So in looking at ideas of a thriving community too, they did a little mini inquiry today on deontology, utilitarianism, and Rawlsian principles, like the fairness principle. Mm-hmm. And so we gave them some resources for that. Different groups had each thinker. Then they did a gallery walk around the room where they were taught about each thinker from the other groups, right? Mm-hmm. So just the usual moves that teachers use in their other classrooms, but again, the focus is maybe different on the content. And then at the end of the day, or at the beginning of the day, sometimes too, we'll ask them to reflect on one of those competencies. So like, what competencies do you want to work on today? Like, you're going to work in your mindset, or you're going to try to think sort of globally and transdisciplinarily, and sort of ask them to sort of reflect on that almost on a daily basis to try to build that in.
Okay, so highly structured and highly scaffolded for the students to journey through the stuff that you've kind of laid out here. But I like what you just mentioned there. So they start with what's that competency they really want to focus on for today's lesson. Is that right?
Yeah. And we have sort of like a wheel where if I share my screen, I can share with you where we have different questions and sort of coming from each of the competencies, and we'll sort of highlight some that are most pertinent to that day's work. So if they're going to be collaborating like they were today, we'll put a collaboration outcome on there. And so we'll be like, okay, we really want to focus on this. So like, how can you ensure that everyone in your group today is actually contributing? So before we go into this group work, let's think about that, right? Really prime their brain with that. And I mean, I find it helps, like again, and this is stuff that, as I was saying earlier, often gets pushed aside in other classes. It's like, oh, I don't have time for that. And, that's maybe okay. Like in a fast-paced like IB Chem class or AP Calc class, like, because there's different outcomes. I think that's the beautiful thing about like a more sort of like liberal arts approach to education is that like, yeah, there's different classes where there's different learning outcomes and different things, different things are emphasized. And in here, that's what we emphasize,
Right. Mm-hmm. So the intention of the core is these competencies, and the competencies come out in this wheel. So like collaboration is one of them.
Mindset, global citizenship, communication, creativity, and critical thinking.
Nice. You've done this before.
So much.
Okay. So they have this wheel and then you're highlighting those in the classes. So it's like the student, it's like in a content-based one, the students know what the objectives are. They're really actively looking at it. Like, I know what I'm supposed to be working on here.
Yes. And this is also a 2-year course, I should mention. This is the inaugural year of 1, and then this cohort will matriculate to Deep Learning 2, where they'll be doing a more sort of individual project, ideally with outside partners. And in that situation, they are going to be asked to sort of choose the competencies, the sort of learning outcomes. Each of these competencies have like 6 learning outcomes to them. And they will choose the competency that they want to focus on through their project or group of competencies, or like 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever. And then that's what they will focus on. And they will reflect on like why they chose those, why they think they need to get better in those and develop those. Then as they're working through their senior project, if you will, they'll be reflecting on how they've made progress in those areas while simultaneously making progress in their project, their like literal project.
So for those students who, we kind of mentioned it at the top of the show, some of those students who might be a little bit more grade focused and that sort of thing, do they see this as, okay, I have to do all the competencies and I have to make sure I meet all the learning outcomes in order to succeed? Or is it set up as a way where like students can pick, like, these are the competencies I'm already kind of good at and I want to strengthen them, and this is the thing that I kind of want to do, and therefore I focus on these maybe 3 or 4 competencies and the learning outcomes with them, and I kind of ignore the rest? How does that, is it one or the other? Is it kind of both and? How do you see that playing out, especially with those students who are more quantitatively driven?
Yeah, there's no expectation that they address all of them.
Cool.
There is the outcome or the result that they will all be emphasized at different points throughout the year. As I just mentioned, we would emphasize collaboration when they do something collaborative. But in Deep Learning 2, there's no expectation that they would have to sort of tick them all off.
Okay.
Not at all. They just have to, know themselves and know which ones they should sort of focus on and improve on.
And so then how is that interpreted and reflected upon from both the student and I guess parents who maybe are just looking for a grade and they're looking for, okay, but yes, is my kid the best in the room?
Yeah. How has it been with like the other stakeholders, like parents and kind of everyone else around at the school?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We went on sort of like a sales campaign last spring where we like went into the grade 10 advisories. We did some like mini lessons of sort of like, here's like a preview, right, of like what it'll be like. And we went to the board. We presented to the board. We presented at parent coffees. We sent out letters and communications to the parents. They knew this was coming, and they knew it was going to be different. And there hasn't last spring, as we were sort of like rolling it out and sort of selling it, for lack of a better term, getting community buy-in. There was a bit of pushback about like, this seems really nebulous, right? And so will this be hard? Will this be easy? This is taking the place of an AP class my student can take, right? It's required the way TOK is required in the IB diploma. We require it for our high school diploma. Every student has to take Deep Learning 1 and 2. And that does take up a slot in their schedule. And they're trying to, maximize the courses that they want to take. And so there was some concern around that. And this year, though, like coming out of parent-teacher conferences, it was great. Like there was incredible feedback. I mean, it's what you guys experience, talking to parents when you are a TOK teacher. Like they're like, oh, our dinner table conversations are so awesome. Like I wish I could take this class. Like once they're in it and see what the value is, they get it, right? Like they get it. It's just something so different,
Right.
and so different.
Do you think there's then greater buy-in because, this doesn't have the typical grading system of some of my other courses, and therefore I can almost kind of relax a little bit. I don't have to worry about that judgment pressure, but rather I can just be fully present in this classroom. That's
the goal. I mean, we initially wanted to not have grades at all in this class, but then we realized like that wouldn't really work either. And our administration too, for like the teachers out there and like college counselors out there, our administration did a full college tour this summer last summer where they met with admissions directors, and they told them about this course. Would this help our kids? Would it hurt our kids? Like, how should we describe it to universities? Like, they did a full deep dive with college admissions. Should we grade it? Should we not? And so what sort of came out of that is that, yeah, we should still attach a grade to it. But they almost unanimously were like, this will make your kids distinct. Like, this is what we're looking for. This will set them apart from every other kid with 10 APs coming out of an American high school. And we are the American school in Japan.
Becoming a better IBDP educator is a daily practice informed through reading, research, personal experience, and episodes from IB Unplugged, like the one you are listening to right now. But sometimes the show can go a bit too quickly, or we can simply forget some of the key points once we are out of the car or back from our walk and in the office preparing for our next lesson. That's why it's easy to download the episode summary at cognity.com/IB Unplugged. Simply navigate to today's episode and click Free Summary to receive a condensed summary of today's episode, including links to other sources and other exciting bits of information you can use immediately in your daily practice. It's free and it helps. Now, back to the show.
And I'm wondering also, like, I see how we're seeing the positive impact from the parents, the other teachers teaching the other subjects. Have you seen any difference in how are you teaching any other subjects right now?
Yeah, I'm teaching psychology also. And last year I taught AP Seminar, which is sort of a research-focused course. We, as a school, want deep learning is a full school thing. These competencies that I rattled off to you, they are not unique to the deep learning course. They are school-wide, the way an ATLs would be for an IB school.
Yeah.
And so the elementary and middle school are doing incredible work and have been on getting kids comfortable with this language. And I know that our course will look different in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years than it does now, because kids will come to us just so fluent in this and so used to it. Mm-hmm. So it definitely is a whole school sort of change. Deep learning is the culmination of that pedagogical shift.
Mm-hmm.
So then do you see some of the stuff that's going on within deep learning? I mean, a moment ago, you were just distinguishing how the liberal arts style of education is so powerful in that you can have different learning outcomes and, for that matter, different learning approaches in each particular course. But do you see the style of learning and the style of approach that you're doing here as something that could benefit other courses? You know, if I am a biology teacher specifically, is this style of thing something that you think would be useful in those types of courses as well? Or is it better to kind of keep it in its place?
I think it's a time issue, right? Like, I'm just sort of a realist about it. Like, if a kid's taking IB Bio and they are taking an exam and you have to get through that curriculum, you only have so many hours in the year, right? Mm-hmm. And you have a dictated hours by the IB that how many hours you have to teach that content. Sure. So how much space do you have to do this work? You know, if you were at a non-IB school and you were not teaching an IB course, I think, you know, sky's the limit in terms of your flexibility and how you wanted to integrate this type of work with your content work. I think that's the future. Again, as we started this conversation sort of talking about the future of education. I do sort of see it going more that way, where we can de-emphasize content in some of these other areas because we have tools to sort of do the heavy lifting in that way for us. Although that's not the actual heavy lifting, that's the sort of like what we think is the heavy lifting, sure. the calculating. The real heavy lifting is the transdisciplinary application, right? It is the problem solving. That's the real heavy lifting.
Yeah.
And so I think that when you are freed from curricular constraints, then you can integrate more of this. Now, again, I'm not trying to disparage the IB and curricular constraints. I love the IB. Yeah. I think they have a wonderful curriculum. But
to that, I mean, obviously they're constantly doing curriculum review. They're always looking for people to be involved in the curriculum review and talking about ways that it can be better. I even just got an invitation for like the biology, chemistry, physics ones, and I know everybody did. That was in the new DP newsletter. And so I guess what I'm getting at here is like, as the IB reviews the curriculum and what they deem as like, here's what needs to be in the curriculum, should we start to shift a lot of what we've been speaking about with regard to like curriculum knowledge, push that a little bit further out and bring in more competency type stuff like what you're doing here? Or is it better to kind of keep them, this is science type thinking, this is maths type thinking, this is English type thinking, that sort of thing?
Well, that's such a good question. Again, as long as the IB still works as a sorting mechanism for the Oxbridges of the world, scoring metacognition is it's going to be, the scoring of it would be tough. The assessment would need to shift. And then again, you get that problem with like, well, if you're not testing it, then maybe it's not emphasized in the classroom. And so testing metacognition, testing critical thinking. The IB has very great ways of testing critical thinking, I believe.
Yeah.
Excellent ways of testing critical thinking. Creativity is a bit harder to test. Mindset's certainly harder to test. Global citizenship is harder to test. Global collaboration, you know what I mean? Like these are harder things to assess in a standardized way when we're trying to when we're labeling kids with numbers and then deciding who goes to Oxford.
Right. But if you were running an IB psych workshop right now, and now that you've had some time to really sit in on this deep learning course, and you wanted teachers to be able to at least take parts of this, what would be the parts that you think they could reasonably put into an IB Psych, for example, course?
Another really great question. I think you can integrate metacognitive reflection in terms of what you can ask students to apply the learning to themselves. I think that the new IB Psych syllabus is excellent in trying to reduce the reliance on regurgitation and memorization and emphasize application and integration. And I couldn't be happier with the review. You were talking about reviews, John. The new IB syllabus is amazing. And that it does lend itself to integrating this type of reflecting, like, why does this matter to me, right? Like, what was my childhood like when we're studying human development, right? What are ways that we can communicate ideas about health and wellness to others in the community to increase my classmates in my high school's health and well-being? So like, how can I think deeply about communication techniques, considering my audience, considering my goal, my purpose, and then maybe a project is a PSA, right? A health campaign in your high school. And that's very easy to integrate into the IB psychology curriculum. And in fact, we have at Cognity integrated some of that work into the new textbook, and it does lend itself to that. And while that might not be the reflection on that collaboration might not be assessed in an IB way, the learning is still there in terms of the application and the style of learning that I know the IB is trying to nudge teachers towards, which is that application to the real world, bringing psychology sort of out of from a dry sort of regurgitation of research to a living thing that has real world application.
So as a content teacher in the IB specifically IB biology, but as a content teacher in the IB programs, I guess what I'm hearing now is, first, be aware of those places in the content as it already stands where there are some good places where I could really get into the deep learning and develop the competencies like you've just been speaking about, and then try to scaffold that in, obviously being aware of my time constraints, but knowing that developing those competencies is going to be profoundly important for the young person, just as much, and probably way more than understanding the specific content mechanisms. And therefore, if I'm a subject teacher, I need to just be aware of them, and I need to scaffold through those as much as I possibly can. Is that a fair summary of what you've just mentioned?
Yeah, definitely. And what's transferable? I think you used that word earlier. And those are the skills. In essence, that is what deep learning is all about, is what is transferable across subjects to your own life. What are the mindsets? How can I change the way I view this course, this biology, the way I view biology, the way I view myself in orientation to something that's challenging in my IB biology class, the way I prepare for my exams, like all that stuff, helping students engage in self-reflection. So even if something simple, a great way to do it, something as simple as your students take a test. You ask before the test is coming up, you announce it. Write down a goal for the test. What is your goal? What score do you want to get? I'm sure you use IB rubrics and IB assessments. What score do you want to get? In IB Psych, would be 22 is the max score. I want to get an 18 out of 22. Okay, how are you going to make that happen? Write down how you're going to make that happen. This is a very quick and easy way to integrate metacognition into an IB course that is very useful. It doesn't take a lot of time. And again, you don't need to assess it, but you've integrated into your practice. Now the students take the test. Maybe they get an 18, maybe they don't. You ask them, did you meet your goal? Why might you have not met your goal? And maybe they didn't prepare the right way, as they said. Maybe they prepared the way they said, but it didn't work. And now they say, I'll prepare differently next time. Maybe it was some other environmental thing. Maybe they were up late because they had a basketball game. And so like little things like that to like encourage metacognition wherever possible, I think is really, really, really important and is certainly possible.
Yeah, you can see how that would be both simple, effective, time, appropriate for time, and could easily transfer to all different types of courses as well.
Yeah, and around collaboration too, like as they move into that group work, we all do group work, and you can certainly have them create similar goals and have similar sort of reflections on their collaborative work, and that helps them learn themselves as collaborators. What worked, what didn't, what you need from your group mates to help you be successful, and then have them share that out with their group mates.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is there's plenty of opportunities, and I think we know this as educators, where we're thinking like, I'm hoping that these competencies are actually being learned while I'm doing this thing, or I'm kind of expecting that they'll be learned kind of almost by osmosis or some form. Like I'm not directly bringing it out, but they're going to develop these things anyway. But instead, what I'm hearing now is take the beat to recognize there is something else that you could be teaching right now and that could be emphasized. Take the beat to recognize it, have the students think critically about it, write some things down, and then dive into that, and then take the moment to come back and reflect on it. It's not going to take more than a couple minutes, and it could have a big impact on how the students learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. I think we can wrap up talking about assessment, because I think a lot of people do want to know, because it is something that does still matter for a lot of different schools and has kind of value in that. But if you could give a bit of a explanation of how you do assess this deep learning course, that would be great.
Yeah, we have 3 strands, communication, process, and significance, and they are reflected on their metacognition exclusively in regard to those 3 strands, and they reflect on their Harkness experience in terms of the process preparing for it, what they took away from it, and then their sort of communication choices during it. And then also each unit has a artifact, and they do the same thing, reflect on communication, process, and significance. Okay, so how are you engaged in the process? What was challenging? How did you overcome those challenges? And then what communication choices did you make? If you wrote an essay, well, why was it an essay, not a presentation? Or why was it a presentation, not an essay? And then inside that, what they need to consider their audience. So for a lot of the artifacts, I'm not the audience. There's a number of artifacts. In fact, earlier in the course, some of the belief ones I mentioned earlier, their audience was their parents. Imagine that, like giving your parents a presentation on like who you see yourself as a teenager. Like I would love it if my daughter came to me and did that. And so and then that changes the structure of their content, right? And you guys know, like your audience matters, your product.
Right.
And we're trying to get students to appreciate that and be purposeful about their choices. Everything we do is trying to design slower thinking, engage system 2, to use a psych term, and be purposeful. Be purposeful and think about the choices you're making. Don't just make them on autopilot.
Yeah. One thing that you said earlier that stuck with me was like, it's not a safe space, it's a brave space. And I'm wondering, have you seen a difference in how they're being assessed of like the shy kid or the students that are more, it's such a bigger barrier to be in a brave space for them? Like, have you seen a big difference there?
Yeah, it is. For some kids, it's still very challenging. They're really reticent. And those are the kids whose reflections I often look forward to reading the most, because it's so cool than what they give you versus what they're not comfortable with sharing with their classmates. But then there are other students that now it's, April, and they're starting to share more. They're starting to come out of their shell more. They're starting to be more willing to contribute. Like today we went from the Disney princess and then talking about affirmative action and like should representation in media be like dictated? Like should we dictate like how many leads in different TV shows and movies go to different ethnicities or genders or whatever? And then that went from affirmative action in media to affirmative action in like other realms of life. And a student who's been quiet sort of all year, and I know they're sort of more sort of right of center politically, they said, I don't think it should be regulated by the government. And they never would have said that in September or October or December. And so that was really great to see. And what was even more great is that even though the majority of the class sort of the vibe was that most people thought it should, were in favor of affirmative action in different realms of society, the way they respectfully responded to that student was just awesome.
Anything else that you feel like we haven't covered that you'd want to make sure we know about with regard to the deep learning course? I mean, I feel like I don't know, it's been super enlightening, and I feel like I've learned a whole lot just now, and I'm feeling quite inspired about my own teaching. But is there anything else you'd want to add here?
No, I mean, just that, again, I think it's really important for schools to sort of put their money where their mouth is, right? Like if they say they care about mindset and competencies and these skills that we know through research really matter in the world more than sort of more traditional sort of testable, objectifiable markers of like intelligence or skill sets or competencies, we should create the spaces in our schools to do that. Right?
Yeah.
Or we should emphasize that, and we should empower IB teachers to maybe, not get to that unit, or like the exam score isn't maybe what the most important thing is here. The most important thing is teaching students the skills and the mindsets that we know will make them successful, and again, personally successful, and also successful in sort of the greater communities that they move into, as the dynamics of those communities are changing so profoundly in response to sort of technology and AI. And we really do need to equip them to handle sort of these changes that are coming at them at warp speed. And so I'm just really proud and thankful that our school has created that space and is really leaning into that. And I just feel sort of honored every day to sort of walk into the classroom and get to try to and do this experiment with the kids. And we are learning as we go, as I said, and it's not perfect. And it's a really teaching soft skills, assessing mindset, teaching mindset. How do you teach mindset, right? These are challenges that are not easy questions to answer, but we're trying, right?
Yeah.
You got to try. You got to start somewhere. And, and I would just encourage teachers to try. Just start, just try. Because I know a lot of us out there know that is what's really important.
I love it. And it's got me super inspired because we're actually doing an audit of our assessment policy right now and really thinking deeply about what are the things that are going to be present in our policy. So if for nothing else, you've definitely inspired me to go into that with a little bit more vigor. So thanks, Matt.
You're very welcome, John. That's very kind of you to say.
Cool.
Great.
Thanks so much for this conversation, Matt. It's been really enlightening, as I mentioned before, and really cool to see the work that you're doing with the deep learning course. And I think it's an awesome course you got going there. I'm glad that your school's taking it on, as you mentioned there as well. And hope to hear back from you soon to see how year 2 of the deep learning course goes.
Yes, thank you so much. It was great talking with you and Courtney. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. We appreciate it too. Take care. IB Unplugged is a Cognity podcast hosted by John Patton and Courtney Marlene and produced by Catalina Gaffney. Be sure to subscribe or follow and share with your fellow IB educators. If you'd like to submit a topic, request, or question, please do so on cognity.com/IB Unplugged. Let's keep the conversation going and support each other in teaching with confidence, creativity, and joy. See you next time.